I want to begin by saying that I take care of my lawn the way some people take care of their children, with attention, consistency, genuine affection, and the willingness to spend money on it that a reasonable outside observer might consider slightly excessive. I am aware that this is a particular kind of passion that not everyone shares. I'm aware that to people who do not care about lawns, my lawn is just grass, and grass is just a thing that grows between a sidewalk and a house and requires occasional mowing, and that is the end of the relationship. I do not try to convert people to my position. I do not knock on neighbors' doors and explain the benefits of my Kentucky Bluegrass seed blend or the specific aeration schedule I follow in September or the soil amendment program I have maintained for 11 consecutive years. I do not evangelize. I simply tend my lawn, and my lawn responds by being the finest residential lawn in Sycamore Hills, which is a fact I state not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has the results to support the claim. My name is Dennis Farrow. I am 53 years old. I live in Sycamore Hills, which is a mature neighborhood, not an HOA development, just a neighborhood with established trees and original 1970s homes and the kind of settled, familiar character that neighborhoods acquire when the same families have lived in them long enough to know each other's dogs by name. I have lived here for 16 years. In those 16 years, I have invested approximately $40,000 in my lawn, which sounds like a number that should embarrass me, but does not, because the investment has compounded into something extraordinary. My lawn has a root system that goes 12 inches deep in the front yard and 10 inches in the back. My lawn has never had a grub problem because I have maintained a consistent integrated pest management program since 2014. My lawn has a color in July, a deep, saturated blue-green that the Kentucky Bluegrass variety I use produces when it is receiving the correct nitrogen schedule and the correct irrigation, that I have heard described by 3 separate people as the color that grass is supposed to be in paintings. The irrigation system is the heart of all of it. I installed it myself 11 years ago, 12 zones, 47 heads, a smart controller that adjusts run times based on local weather data, and a pressure regulation setup that ensures every head on every zone runs at exactly the specified operating pressure. I know every head by number and location. I know the arc and radius of every zone. I know to the minute what time each zone runs and for how long, and I adjust the schedule seasonally with the precision of someone who understands that overwatering and underwatering are equally destructive, and that the window between them is narrower than most people realize. The system is, in the word I used about my grandfather's backhoe, cherished. Christine Bolger moved into the house directly across the street 6 years ago. She is approximately my age, divorced, with an adult daughter who visits on weekends, and a blue Honda Pilot that she parks in her driveway when the driveway is not occupied by her daughter's car, and on the street in front of her house when the driveway is occupied, and everywhere else when neither of those options seems convenient enough. I want to be fair to Christine before I describe what she did, because she is not, in most respects, a difficult person. She waves in the morning. She keeps her house reasonably maintained. She brings mail in for neighbors when they travel. She is a fine neighbor in 9 out of 10 categories of neighbor behavior. The 10th category is parking. Christine Bolger parks wherever the car fits. This is not a conscious philosophy, I do not think. It is more of an absence of philosophy, a gap in the mental framework where the question of whether a parking location is appropriate for the parking location's owner would normally sit. She parks in front of other people's houses without particular thought about whether this is something the owners of those curbs prefer. She parks in the fire hydrant zone in front of Mark Aldrich's house down the block with a frequency that suggests she has assessed the probability of enforcement and found it acceptable. She parks in the guest spot at the end of the block that the Tremins have been using for their own guests for 12 years, and she parks there when the Tremins have guests and does not appear to connect these 2 facts. None of this directly affected me until the October when she began parking on my lawn. Let me explain the geography. My house sits on a corner lot, which means I have a front yard that faces the main street and a side yard that faces the cross street. The side yard is where the story happens. The cross street has parallel parking along my side of it, between the sidewalk and the curb, and for most of the year, this is not an issue because the street is wide enough and the parking demand is low enough that nobody needs to park particularly close to my property. But in October, the cross street becomes the preferred parking for the weekend farmers market that sets up in the church parking lot 2 blocks away, and the parking fills for 3 blocks in each direction, and people looking for space begin making creative decisions about where their cars can go. Christine Bolger's creative decision was my side yard. The side yard does not have a curb cut. It does not have a driveway entrance. It is lawn from the sidewalk to the house, continuous and uninterrupted, the same Kentucky bluegrass that covers my front yard, the same root system and soil amendment program and irrigation coverage. There is no visual indicator that this lawn is a parking area. There is a sidewalk, and then there is lawn, and the lawn is clearly lawn in the way that things are clearly what they are when they are that thing in an obvious and unmarked way. Christine drove her Honda Pilot over the sidewalk and onto my side lawn on the first Saturday of October. I did not see her do it. I came outside that afternoon and found the car sitting on my grass approximately 12 feet from the sidewalk, 2 tire tracks pressed into the lawn surface where the weight of the vehicle had compressed the turf. I stood there looking at it for a moment with the feeling that precedes anger, which is the feeling of not entirely believing what you are seeing. I left a note on her windshield. The note was polite. It said that this was private residential lawn and not a parking area, and I asked that she not park on it again. I signed it with my name and address. She came to my door that evening and apologized. She said she had not realized she had gone off the pavement. She had been looking for a spot and had not noticed the transition. I said I understood, but asked her please to be careful in the future. She said absolutely, she would. She was genuine about it in the way that people are genuine about things they believe they will not do again. She parked on my lawn 4 weeks later. Same location, same Saturday morning, same tire tracks in the same approximate position. This time I saw her do it. I watched her drive the Pilot over the sidewalk from my front window, park it at her preferred angle, get out of the car with a reusable grocery bag over her shoulder, and walk toward the farmer's market without looking back at the car or at my lawn. I walked across the street and knocked on her door. She was not home. I left another note, this time more direct. It said this was the second time and I was asking her not to park on my lawn, and that if it happened again, I would need to take further steps. I kept a copy of both notes in a folder I started specifically for this situation. The further steps I mentioned were not yet clearly defined in my own head. I was thinking about options. I thought about the obvious ones, a letter from an attorney, which seemed disproportionate for a parking situation at that stage. A call to the city about parking enforcement, which was possible but slow. A physical barrier of some kind along the side yard perimeter, which was a real option, but one I wanted to think through carefully, because I did not want to install something permanent that would affect the lawn's appearance year-round to solve a problem that was primarily seasonal. Then I thought about the irrigation system. I want to be precise about what I thought and when I thought it, because I am aware that this is the part of the story that people react to most strongly, and I want the reaction to be based on accurate information. I did not immediately think of the irrigation system as a response to Christine parking on my lawn. I thought of it gradually over the course of 2 weeks, during which I went back to my zone maps and confirmed something I had always known but had not recently considered in this specific context. Zone 6, which covers the full side yard, runs 12 heads in an arc pattern that covers every square foot of the side yard surface, including the 12-foot strip from the sidewalk to the house where Christine's car had been parked. Zone 6 has a run time in fall of 22 minutes. Zone 6 runs through its full cycle in 22 minutes at a flow rate sufficient to deliver approximately 1/3 of an inch of water across the full zone area. A vehicle parked in the Zone 6 coverage area during a Zone 6 cycle would be, without qualification, thoroughly wet. Zone 6 was scheduled to run at 7:45 every other morning on the automatic cycle. I could also run it manually from my phone at any time, for any duration, immediately, without going outside or touching any physical control. The Smart Controller app on my phone allowed me to select any zone and run it for any duration at the touch of 2 buttons. I thought about this for 2 weeks. I thought about it the way I think about any problem that has a solution I can see but am not yet sure is the right solution, carefully, from multiple angles, with attention to what the outcome of each option actually produced, and whether that outcome was proportionate and justified. The irrigation response was, I concluded, proportionate in the specific sense that it was reversible, non-damaging, and self-limiting. Once Christine's car was wet, and that was the consequence. It was not permanent. It was not harmful to the car. It was not harmful to Christine. It was water. The lawn needed the water anyway. The only person for whom it would be a negative experience was someone who had parked their car where they were not supposed to park it, which meant the negative experience was directly connected to the choice that caused it, which is the structure of a natural consequence rather than a punitive one. I decided it was the right solution, then I waited. The third Saturday of November, Christine Bolger's Honda Pilot drove over my sidewalk and onto my side yard at 8:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was at my kitchen table with my coffee and my phone when I heard the characteristic sound of tires crossing a concrete sidewalk edge, which is a sound I had unfortunately memorized, and I looked at the clock on my microwave. I picked up my phone, I opened the Irrigation Controller app, I went to Zone 6. But I did not immediately hit run. I sat at my kitchen table for approximately 7 minutes, drinking my coffee, thinking one more time about whether this was the right thing to do. I was thinking about proportionality. I was thinking about whether the outcome I was about to produce was the outcome I intended, and whether the outcome I intended was the outcome this situation called for. I thought about the 2 notes. I thought about the apology. I thought about the second parking incident and the second note. I thought about the 4 weeks between the second incident and this one, during which nothing further had happened because the farmer's market had not been running, and during which I might have concluded the problem was solved, except that I had a strong suspicion the farmer's market would come back, and so would Christine. The farmer's market had come back, so had Christine. I hit run. Zone 6 runs a sequential arc pattern. The heads don't all fire simultaneously. They run in a sequence that sweeps the coverage area systematically to ensure even distribution. The first heads to fire on Zone 6 are at the far end of the zone, near the house, and the coverage sweeps toward the sidewalk over the course of the first 8 minutes. The heads nearest the sidewalk, the ones whose arcs cover the 12-foot strip where the car was parked, fire in the second half of the cycle. I sat at my kitchen table and drank my coffee. At approximately 8:26, based on Zone 6's timing sequence, the heads covering the parking area would have begun their cycle. I know what happened next from 2 sources. The first is my neighbor across the cross street, a retired postal worker named Gene Cafferty, who was on his front porch that morning and who called me that afternoon and said, "Dennis, I want you to know I saw what happened, and I think it was the funniest thing I have witnessed on this street in 30 years. The second source is my own view from my kitchen window, which gave me a partial angle on the side yard during the later portion of Zone 6's cycle. From Gene's account, Christine had returned from the farmer's market at approximately 8:29. She was carrying 2 bags and was walking on the sidewalk toward her car. The Zone 6 heads that covered the parking area had been running for approximately 3 minutes. Christine approached her car, which was, by this point, comprehensively wet. She stopped. She looked at the car. She looked at the heads, which were still rotating through their arcs. She looked at her car again. She set her bags down on the sidewalk outside the spray coverage area. She stood there for a moment. From my kitchen window angle, I saw her walk to the passenger side of the car, the side facing away from the spray heads, open the door, reach across, and make what appeared to be an assessment of the interior. The windows had been up, which meant the interior was dry. The exterior of the car was not dry. The exterior of the car was, at that point, approximately as wet as a car gets when it has been in rain for 20 minutes, which is the level of wet that Zone 6 produces over its cycle. Gene told me Christine stood beside her wet car for about 4 minutes while the irrigation completed its cycle. She looked at the car and at the house, and at the irrigation heads as they ran. She did not come to my door. She did not call out. She stood beside her wet car with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to someone who is quietly assembling a complete picture of what has just happened to them and why, and finding that the picture, when assembled, is not one in which they are the wronged party. When Zone 6 completed its cycle, the heads retracted. Christine picked up her bags, got in the driver's side, started the car, and drove it back across the sidewalk onto the street. I finished my coffee, I rinsed the mug, I went outside to check the lawn. The tire tracks from Christine's car were visible in the turf, the same compressed grass pattern I had seen twice before, the characteristic impression of vehicle weight on lawn surface. Zone 6's cycle had delivered its standard fall application of water across the zone, which the grass needed and would use, so the irrigation had served its scheduled purpose regardless of everything else. I walked the zone perimeter, checked the head positions, noted that everything was functioning correctly, and went back inside. My phone buzzed at 10:53 that morning. It was a text from Christine. It said, "Dennis, I think your sprinklers came on while my car was parked there." I looked at the text for a moment. Then I typed back, "Zone 6 runs automatically on the controller schedule. Is there something I can help you with?" She wrote, "My car is all wet." I wrote, "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything else?" She wrote, "Were you watching?" I wrote, "I was home this morning, yes." There was a pause of about 4 minutes. Then she wrote, "I see," and that was the end of the text exchange. I put my phone back on the table and picked up the book I had been meaning to get to all morning and read for 2 hours in the particular piece of a Saturday morning that has been fully attended to. But the Saturday after that, Christine drove onto my lawn again. I want to be clear that this surprised me. I had expected the sprinkler incident to produce the outcome I intended, which was a clear and direct connection between parking on my lawn and an uncomfortable consequence that would make the behavior unattractive going forward. It had not produced that outcome. What it had produced was the wet car, the text exchange, and apparently a recalibration that had lasted exactly 1 week before arriving at the same decision. I sat at my kitchen table that second Saturday morning and looked at the pilot on my lawn and thought about what that meant. It meant Christine Bolger was either not connecting the consequence to the choice in the durable way I had hoped, or she was connecting them and had decided the consequence was acceptable, or she had concluded that the first sprinkler incident had been genuinely automatic and coincidental. Any of those 3 possibilities pointed toward the same requirement, which was that the connection needed to be made explicit, unambiguous, and accompanied by something more formal than a text message that said, "I was home this morning." I picked up my phone, opened the irrigation app, and ran Zone 6 again. Then I called Gene Cafferty and told him to look out his front window. Then I called my attorney. My attorney's name is Susan Park. She has handled my affairs, a rental property I own, a boundary dispute several years ago, and miscellaneous contract matters, for 9 years, and she has the particular quality of an attorney who has heard many variations of many situations and whose response to new ones is not surprise, but immediate practical assessment. I called her on a Saturday morning, which she generally answers because she has told me that problems do not observe business hours and that she prefers to know about things before they escalate rather than after. I described the situation, the 2 previous notes, the first sprinkler incident, the text exchange, and the fact that Christine had driven onto my lawn again 1 week later while I was actively running Zone 6 for the second time. Susan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dennis, before we talk about the letter, I need to ask you something. The second time you ran the sprinklers, you ran them intentionally while she was parked there." I said yes. She said, "And she knows this?" I said she had asked if I was watching and I had confirmed I was home, and that after the second incident she would have no reasonable basis for concluding it was coincidental. Susan said, "Okay. The intentional operation of your own irrigation system on your own property is not, by itself, legally problematic. You have the right to water your lawn whenever you choose. The question is whether continued intentional operation after she's expressed awareness of the situation could be characterized as harassment or intentional interference. My recommendation is that after today, The sprinklers go back on automatic and stay there. No more manual runs. Let the schedule do the work and remove the intentionality question from the picture. I said that was sensible. She said, now let me send her a letter. Susan's letter went out the following Monday by certified mail. It was 3 paragraphs. The first documented the history, 3 incidents of unauthorized parking on private lawn, 2 prior written notifications, the established nature of the damage, risk to the turf. The second stated the legal position that my lawn was private property, that parking on it without permission constituted trespass, and that the documented damage to the turf surface from vehicle weight and tire compression constituted property damage, for which I could seek compensation. The third paragraph stated that if the behavior continued, I would pursue all available remedies, including a civil trespass action and a claim for lawn restoration costs, which Susan noted could include the cost of turf repair, soil aeration, and documentation of any long-term damage to the root system. The last item being something Susan had thought to include after I explained, in perhaps more detail than a normal person would provide, the significance of a 12-inch root system to a properly developed Kentucky bluegrass lawn. The certified mail receipt came back signed 4 days after delivery. Christine had received the letter. She did not park on my lawn the following Saturday. The farmer's market ran, the cross street filled with cars, and Christine's Honda Pilot was parked in front of her own house, partially blocking her own driveway at an angle that suggested she had run out of space and made a compromise, but entirely on her own property and the public street, which was exactly where it was supposed to be. I noted this from my kitchen window with the quiet satisfaction of a situation moving in the correct direction. She did not park on my lawn the Saturday after that, or the Saturday after that. By the 4th Saturday, I had stopped monitoring from the window, which is the clearest sign I know that a situation has resolved, when I no longer feel the need to watch for it. What I did instead on those November Saturday mornings was tend the lawn damage. The tire tracks from Christine's 3 incidents of parking had left 2 areas of compressed turf, each approximately 16 feet long and 6 inches wide, where the weight of the Pilot had pressed the root zone below the optimal aeration level for fall growth. I aerated those sections by hand with a hollow tine aerator, backfilled the plugs with a Sandan compost mix, overseeded with the same Kentucky bluegrass blend I used throughout the front and side yards, and kept both areas on a targeted irrigation boost through November. By the time the first frost arrived in December, both sections were recovering with the specific resilience that a well-maintained root system brings to surface damage. The grass was coming back from the roots rather than from scratch, which is the advantage of 11 years of proper care. By March, you could not tell those sections from the rest of the lawn. The overseeded areas had knitted back into the existing turf completely. The color and density were uniform across the full side yard. I walked the zone on a Sunday morning in April, checking head positions for the spring startup, and I stood in the spot where Christine's car had been parked 3 times, and I looked at the grass under my feet, and it was the grass it had always been. The grass it was always going to be, given adequate time and the root system I had spent 11 years building under it. Gene Cafferty came out of his house while I was doing the zone check that April morning and crossed the street and stood beside me on the lawn. He is 71, retired as I mentioned, and has the comfortable authority of a man who has watched the same street for 30 years and has opinions about everything that has happened on it and on several adjacent streets as well. He looked at the lawn and said, "You'd never know." I said, "No, you wouldn't." He said that was a good lawn before she parked on it, and it's a good lawn now. I said that was the goal. He said, "Dennis, I want to tell you something. When those sprinklers came on and she was standing there with her grocery bags, he started smiling, which on Jean's face is a slow and genuine process. That was one of the most satisfying things I have seen on this street. I didn't say that at the time because I thought you might be in some kind of trouble over it. But it was very satisfying. I said I was glad he had enjoyed it. He said, I told my wife she wanted to applaud. I said, please thank her. He said he would. Christine Bolger and I have not had a direct conversation about the parking situation since the Saturday of the second sprinkler incident. We have had regular conversations about other things. She mentioned her daughter's new job. I told her about a problem I had been having with a service provider. We talked about a neighbor 2 houses down who was doing a renovation. The conversations have been perfectly normal, which is what happens when a dispute is resolved without permanent damage to the relationship. It goes back to its baseline and continues from there, and the resolved thing sits in the background where resolved things sit, acknowledged by both parties without being discussed. I have, however, made one permanent modification to my side yard that I did not have before this situation began. Along the edge where the sidewalk meets the lawn, I installed 8 granite landscape markers, the kind that are set flush with the grade and red as a decorative element rather than a barrier, but which are embedded in concrete footings and serve as a clear delineation between the public sidewalk and the private lawn. They are handsome stones, 3-inch by 12-inch granite blocks set at 36-inch intervals. They are also, for anyone who might consider driving over the sidewalk edge onto the lawn, a clear signal that the surface changes at a specific line and that crossing that line is intentional rather than inadvertent. I installed them myself on a Saturday in late March, set each one in a proper concrete footing, and finished the edges with a clean trowel. They look like they belong there, which they do. Zone 6 is back on the automatic schedule. It runs every other morning at 7:45 from April through October, at calibrated durations that vary by month, according to the evapotranspiration data my smart controller pulls from the local weather station. The lawn has had the spring it deserved after a difficult fall. The warm season green-up was exceptional, the overseeded sections have fully integrated, and the color in May has that saturated blue-green quality that the Kentucky bluegrass produces when everything is correct. I had a conversation with my lawn guy, though that title undersells what Kevin actually does. Because Kevin is a licensed agronomist who consults for 3 golf courses and 4 residential clients of whom I am one, and who visits my property twice a year to assess soil health and make recommendations. He came in early May and walked the full property with his probe and his pH meter and his specific attention to the kind of details that other people do not notice. He stopped at the side yard and looked at the 2 sections where the tire tracks had been. He probed both sections. He checked his readings and moved his probe to the adjacent undamaged turf and checked again. He said, "This recovered well. Root depth is back to standard in both sections." I said I had aerated and overseeded in November. He said, "You did it right. The root continuity is intact." He moved on to the front yard. Kevin does not know about Christine Bolger or the sprinkler situation. He does not need to. What he knows is the lawn, and the lawn told him what it needed to tell him, which was that it had been damaged and had been properly repaired and was now exactly what it had been before the damage. That is all there is to know about the lawn from a technical standpoint. The rest of it, the notes, the text exchange, the certified letter, Gene Cafferty on his porch finding the most satisfying moment on the street in 30 years. That is the human part of the story, which is the part that people tell each other and which is what makes a neighborhood rather than just a collection of adjacent properties. Neighborhoods are made of the small incidents that happen between people who live close enough to each other to be in each other's lives, whether they choose to be or not, and the way those incidents get resolved or don't is what determines whether the proximity is pleasant or not. This one resolved, the lawn is good, Zone 6 runs on schedule. I will say one more thing about this situation, which is about the sprinklers specifically, because I think it is worth saying. The decision to run Zone 6 that first Saturday was a decision I made carefully and believed was the right one, and I still believe it was the right one. It produced, in the moment, the immediate and unmistakable connection between an action and its consequence that 2 polite notes had failed to produce. But it was not, on its own, sufficient. It needed the follow-up, Susan's letter, the formal documentation, the clear statement of legal position to complete the message. The sprinklers were the punctuation. The letter was the sentence. A consequence without context is just an event. A consequence with clear context is information. Christine Bolger, by the time she had read Susan's letter, had both the event and the context, and that combination produced the outcome I was looking for. That is the principle, if there is one. A consequence has to be connected to a choice so clearly that the connection cannot be missed. A gentle note leaves room for ambiguity. A wet car also leaves room for ambiguity. She could have told herself it was coincidence, and she might have, until the second time made coincidence untenable and the letter made the legal picture clear. The system only works when all the pieces are in place. The documentation, the formal notice, the physical reality of standing next to your wet car while the irrigation heads complete their arc, and the knowledge that the person inside the house has confirmed they are home. Gene Cafferty waves from his porch in the morning when I am doing my zone check, or checking the granite markers, or simply walking the lawn the way I do on good mornings in May when everything is exactly the color it is supposed to be. I wave back. The street is quiet. The grass is the color that grass is supposed to be in paintings, and it is my grass, and it is mine in the full and unambiguous sense that matters, mine to tend, mine to protect, mine to restore when it needs restoring, and mine to water on any schedule I choose, including schedules that occasionally coincide, by chance or otherwise, with the presence of vehicles that have no business being there. The smart controller runs Zone 6 at 7:45 every other morning from April through October. It always has. Thumbnail text, asterisk. She parked on my lawn. Zone 6 had other plans.